A very warm welcome to my community. I'm Sherwood McCaskey. As always, I'm pleased that you have joined us. In our last episode, we explored the progression from Bridgetown and St. Michael to other parishes. We discussed the situation in Christchurch. You may ask, and understandably so, what is happening in other parishes such as St. Lucy and St. Peter? As we examine what was occurring in these parishes in relation to the cholera outbreak, we cannot help but draw parallels with the coronavirus as it spread throughout the nation and touched every parish.
So when we go up further into the country, for example, if we go to St. Lucy and we check through the earlier records and we look in 1854, there is no true indication that there were any burial grounds or any land which was purchased for the purpose of burial grounds in St. Lucy. However, we know that there were around 1,193 persons who would have died in St. Lucy because of cholera. So obviously there were burial grounds in this area. Now, as we go deeper into the research, we learned that in the Barbados Globe newspaper of 1862, October 1862, it mentioned that there were heavy rains at the time. And what those heavy rains did is that they damaged the buildings and they also blocked the bridge, which eventually caused the water to gush down to the bottom of Clinklet Hill. And when it gushed down and it hit the bottom of Clinklet Hill, that water actually washed what was referred to as the cholera burials, the coffins, as well as the bodies into the sea. Now, there's no saying whether someone went to recapture those bodies, whether those bodies were buried again, but what we know for sure and for certain is that there were persons who were afflicted with cholera who had died and who were buried at the bottom of Clinklet Hill.
So there were over 30 cholera burial grounds all across this country. And one of them was in what we now call Cave Hill, St. Lucy. As a matter of fact, before the name was changed to Cave Hill, it was called Graveyard, simply Graveyard. And that caused some problems for individuals who had to place their names down and letters come into a place called Graveyard. It was a very serious thing, so they changed the name. But cholera victims were interred in Cave Hill, St. Lucy.
Of course, we can speak of St. Peter, and in St. Peter, we know that there is an area called Indian Ground, and Indian Ground, of course, was a cholera burial ground, but of course there is Review in St. Peter, and that area was in fact a burial ground. There are stories by some of the older folks in St. Peter who actually refer to the area as cholera or cholery. Now, in St. Andrew, for example, too, there are stories of there being a cholera burial ground there. I know that around 877 persons had actually died in St. Andrew because of the cholera epidemic. And a lot of the persons, the older folks in the neighborhood, has actually identified an area in the Scotland district as the place where those cholera victims were buried. And of course, we know from all this record that there were a lot of burials on the plantations. And for example, we have Collington Plantation, and we're not exactly sure where on Collington Plantation in St. John the burial ground was, but for Henley Plantation for sure, it said that the burial ground was closer to Tulsa Yard.
Let us turn our attention now to the parish of St. George. What exactly is happening here as it relates to the cholera epidemic? How are the vestrymen of this parish responding to this situation?
So when the epidemic struck St. George, the vestrymen, they knew that they had to do certain things to ward off a total spread, a total eradication of their working class. The vestry in the mid-19th century, this was the epicenter for poor relief on the island. These vestrymen would have been responsible for the maintenance of basic services within the villages, and they were also responsible for education as well as what stood for basic health care during the mid-19th century. This was around May, June, July. It was humid, so this stench of death permeated across the St. George glebe. And in fact, even where there were unlicensed burials, that would have also occurred across the parish. So they needed to find a burial space where they could bury these persons who would have been either discarded in cane pieces, left to rot where they fell, or persons who would have died within their homes, thrown into wells as a result of dying from cholera.
And when those persons die, what happens is that fear caused them not to go into the house and not to get retrieve their families to take them for a proper burial. And we saw that in a lot of these areas, what they chose to do instead is that they chose to burn the houses down. So you had several houses being burned to the ground. And this meant that government weren't really able to take an account of the number of persons who might have been in that house, and of course the amount of persons who would have died.
In another report, talking about the loss of parents in this example, one man having lost his wife to cholera, and he also being infected, lamented to his children, "Your mother is dead of cholera, and I have got the disease as well, and I shall also die. What, my children, will become of you? Perhaps your grandmother will do something for you." So you see the desperate situations that people were facing. What had happened was that this man had married a woman of lower social status against the objections of his family, and in this situation, he felt alone and afraid. What was he going to do? Were the family going to look kindly upon the children and take care of them after the death of the parents? So feeling helpless for what would happen to his children, this man he found himself in a dilemma. What a cross to bear, and to bear it alone, especially at a time like that. So the dynamics of life, dying and family, even then, were complicated.
Now, this continued in different cases too, because the disease was so vicious that when persons became afflicted with it, we had instances of persons crawling under houses, they were crawling into open spaces, they were crawling into cane fields, for example, and they were dying, unknown to their neighbors, unknown to their families, unknown to their friends. And some of these deaths, of course, weren't reported. And then when we look at the case of persons being thrown into open pits, we look at the fact that sometimes families just decided to bury their loved ones on family property, open land. They decided to burn them. They decided to just get rid of the body in any way or any means.
Some of the more licensed burial grounds, they would have been used to bury the dead. But due to the sheer number of deaths, the sheer horror that was cholera, these licensed burial places quickly became filled. Persons would have been left outside or within these burial spaces to rot. So inundated by the sheer number of deaths, the sheer number of corpses, the sheer weight of the dying, the St. George vestrymen decided that they needed to act to find a new burial space for their parishioners. So an arrangement of sorts was made where the vestrymen of St. George, they engaged the rector to get a certain parcel of land. The glebe lands were under the purview of the church. The parish lands were more under the control of the vestry. But there was a lot of intricacies where persons on the vestry and persons heavily involved in the church were usually members of the planter class. So they knew each other, they socialized together. So there was a thin line of separation between the two. It was supposed to be a simple exchange where the vestry would get 2 acres of glebe land for exchange of 2 acres of parish land. But it soon became apparent that these two parties may not have been authorized to make such an exchange. So it was quickly decided by the vestrymen that they would pay annual rent to the rector to acquire the 2 acres directly behind me. And that space was the space used for the burial of persons who fell victim to the cholera epidemic. Faced by a sheer fear, a sheer horror by their parishioners, the clergy knew that they needed to act. So to ease some of the fears from the public, the angst, the trepidation felt by parishioners, they set out to add something to some of the treatments or some of the cures or some of the potential remedies to cholera. Well, the medicine men in Bridgetown were prescribing things such as sulfur, charcoal, salt, turpentine as antidotes or remedies for cholera. The pastors of the various churches in St. George, they prescribed faith, they prescribed repentance, they prescribed hope, because they felt that, well, the members of the medical fraternity, that was their job to produce cures. They felt that it was their duty to make sure that the souls of their flock would go to a better place, thereby earning salvation when faced by imminent death. So pervasive was death in this parish that the only thing members of the clergy felt that they can do was provide solace. Because although there were unceremonious burials across the parish, it was believed by some that those persons who were buried without due ceremony, that they had a lesser chance of salvation. So this burial space, this cholera burial ground here at the glebe, this was somewhat of a portal to salvation, because it was here these persons would have been buried with some ceremony, some service performed by a religious man, and by being buried in land which was ordained, land which was being blessed by the church, that they would have gotten closer to God through being interred in this space. The sheer volume, the sheer number of persons who died in St. George. In fact, South District was particularly hard hit. I think 350, 400 persons died alone from South District. I think in the area now known as Top Cottage, I think 150 died there. Here in the glebe, I think about 75 persons died here. So there was a lot of dying. There was a lot of suffering. There was a lot of weeping and mourning and sadness. And what made cholera particularly problematic is that persons were buried within hours, even within minutes. And there was a certain lack of closure. There was a certain lack of saying goodbye, of making a clean break between family members, or even some may say a clean break between life and death. And persons were dying so quickly. The process of burial, persons who would have died from cholera were not taken into the church, into the sanctum of the church as as happens now. These persons were taken straight to the point of burial. In fact, during that period, corpses were forbidden to be taken anywhere near the church lands, to be buried within the church lands, within the graveyard proper. So persons who would have died, succumbed to the illness, they would have been taken directly to the place of burial and interred as quickly as possible. So the deceased would have been brought in from this area here. There used to be a gate about 7 feet wide, so they would be brought by cart through this gate, and they would come through another gate here, and it was from this point here that the burial space would start. And it would extend from here straight across, and this entire area would be filled with graves. Very shallow graves, mass graves, and it was inundated with a general sorrow. There was much grief here. If we look to the north, we will see that this area stretches probably 50 meters from the west of the vestry, from the back of the vestry, straight down to just above the Valley Library. And this space, approximately 2 acres, would have been filled with bodies, would have been filled with relatives mourning their loved ones, would have been filled with carriages, carts will be filled with sorrow, will be filled with death. Given the sheer number of burials here at the glebe, there will be a stench associated with the sheer volume of persons being buried. And indeed, some persons from the adjoining Charbridge community would have complained to members of the church that this stench is disturbing them. This stench is causing them a problem. This stench is emanating throughout the community, causing them a particular hardship. So this was brought to the attention of a member of the vestry. His name has been lost to history. And he went to Charbridge and told the residents there that you can either accept the stench or we can lay the corpses at your door. We can come and lay them on the streets, or we can bury them here as best we could and try to mitigate some of the illness, some of the disease throughout the parish. So after that particular vestryman said what he said, there was no further disquiet. There was no further argument from persons from that community pertaining to the stench which was drifting to our neighboring community. And that was not only the case in Charbridge. Other surrounding neighborhoods that surrounded burial spaces, persons grudgingly accepted that there was a burial space close to their houses. They grudgingly accepted it. They accepted the stench because generally they saw it as a greater good. We need to bury our dead. We need to get these persons buried. We need to remove this pestilence from amongst our midst. And if we had to experience a period of hardship, we are willing to do it. We are willing to move on. We are willing to be a healthy society again.
What a thing. Individuals who were committed to keeping their island free of cholera. Now, what about stories? The stories of cholera wreaking havoc over our island.
There's a particular story where one wife, she buried her husband here. I think the sources said about 9 a.m. in the morning. She went back home, and by 12 p.m. she had to return to bury her daughter, right? And about 4 p.m. her son had to bury her. And there's one particular story here where a guy by the name of Cleophas, I think his name is Cleophas Stark, he is said to have been buried in a very shallow grave. I think it was almost 2 feet. And it's been said that he was buried here during the afternoon, and he turned up at his common law wife's house at midnight. Apparently he had gnawed his way out of his resting place, and he came back to his common law wife's home saying, "Here, I'm fine, here I am." This was around midnight. Around 2 a.m. he took ill and died. They brought him here around 6 in the morning again, and he was buried, this time not at 2 feet, but he was buried, I think, at around 4.5 feet. So I guess they either wanted to make sure that he was well and truly buried, or they wanted to make sure that he was well and truly gone. So those are some of these stories that have been told, where they're anecdotal.
But these are the stories, and our people have always loved stories. The oral tradition is ingrained in our culture, and we have always celebrated such. Now, speaking of stories, let us discuss the tales of the burial ground.
This burial ground, this has always been known to be a place where persons with cholera were interred. In fact, when I was growing up, it was called the Collie Ground. And it was well known that this was where persons were interred with cholera. And in fact, persons in the community, they've never really shunned the area. In fact, it was a thoroughfare connecting the Constant District here to the glebe, and, because that gives person a quicker path to the glebe, which has greater transport access, right? It has been used as a thoroughfare for students from the St. George Secondary as well, who prefer not to walk across the greater distance of the main road, and historically they've come through the gully behind me, and they walk through the collie ground, and that cuts maybe 15 minutes off their walk from school. So this place has been known, and is known, to be a place where persons would have been interred due to cholera, but has never been shunned. And in fact, members of this community hold this space with a particular reverence, because we know and they know that this is where distant relatives will have been interred, whether they're relatives from communities outside of the glebe or relatives from the glebe. We've always given or shown this space a particular level of respect, and that has been shown recently, relatively recently, in the beautification of the area from what was pretty much a more rough look space to a more manicured space where you can see chairs. There's some tables over there. It's well manicured. The cholera ground itself, which in part rests behind me, that has been manicured, and it has never been disturbed. A private entity would have contributed heavily to the manicure effect that we can see. And contrary to this being a place of trepidation, it now has a picnic look about it. It has a tranquil look. It looks like a place far removed from death. And in 2024, we would like to keep a space like this not only resembling a place of death, but a place of rebirth. Because this area, which was once an area that caused significant fear, it has now been reborn into a tranquil place, a place where persons can come and look at the sunset. They can come and have a sandwich. They can come and just relax and reflect on what would have been the lives of their fellow parishioners, their ancestors. This is really an ancestral space. This is one of the spaces where well over 1,000 Barbarians have been buried, 1,000 parishioners. And I really believe that given its importance, given its historical importance, that some form of commemorative plaque should be placed here so that not only residents of the glebe, but also that persons from the wider St. George area, as well as persons beyond St. George, into persons from other parishes can look and see that this is a space where the ancestors would have been buried after succumbing to the cholera epidemic. And it hasn't been disturbed due to a lasting stigma.
As a matter of fact, for over 100 years after cholera, in the 1850s, people were afraid of going close to a cholera burial ground. As a matter of fact, there was a law passed that the cholera burial grounds must not be disturbed. Must not be disturbed.
There is a belief that should persons dig up, or persons uproot, or persons uproot the soil, or disturb the soil, that the cholera will rise again, will permeate the glebe and wider St. George and cause a recurrence.
No, there is no. If you go and disturb the burial grounds now, it's unlikely you will get cholera from disturbing the burial grounds, from going exhuming the bodies, because the only thing you're going to find at this point is bones. And the bones not going to host the organism anyway. So no, that's not possible. We have high temperatures already. So by then the organisms, the persons, everything already decomposed, degraded and everything. So there's no, you will not, and it doesn't survive in soil like that. It has to be waterborne. So even if we had to have a deluge of water and it infiltrated the burial grounds of the persons who had cholera, to be honest, if it didn't happen then, it can happen now. But certainly it is not possible because the bacteria and so forth would have been degraded. It would have died a long time, and so there's no possibility of recovering the bacteria from those bones because they will be bones at this point. Persons, even if, you know, as I say, you need a source of water or you need food and you need a viable organism. If the bacteria has died, there's no way that you will become infected with it. And so if it has, you know, there's no way for the organism to survive on anything else, you know, then it's going to die out. So there will be no way of us becoming infected, even if we had a deluge of rain and it infiltrated the burial grounds and, you know, the water seeped into the underground aquifers or whatever. What you would have to do is now get somebody who had cholera to come in the island and spread it, and that's how we get it.
Of course, today, many persons play at cholera burial grounds. For example, Dover Playing Field in Christchurch is a cholera burial ground. And of course, at Bass Rock, people have picnics at Bass Rock. And of course, this is next to a famous restaurant. People have picnics there. So a lot has changed now. And this thinking that if you go close to the burial ground, you could be in trouble, that has all gone.
But what remains are the stories and the findings from the excellent research that was conducted by our scholars and students of history who have contributed their research findings to this mini-series on the cholera epidemic in Barbados. We continue to thank Dr. Henderson Carter, his colleagues, and his students. This has been Mind Community, the story of the cholera epidemic in Barbados. The mini-series continues next week at the same time. In the meantime, do take good care of yourself and look out for the interests of your neighbors.